Attention wrestling fans. You're now about to listen to the man coming down the aisle from the main streets of South Elgin, Illinois, with a microphone in his hand and questions on his mind. This is Whaddya Say with DDJ.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 31 of Whaddya Say with DDJ. As always, I am your host, DDJ. It's time to get right to it. Joining me this week is Steve Tortorello, the principal of Marian Catholic High School in suburban Chicago, Illinois, and he runs Warrior Wrestling, which many of the fans in the Illinois area and surrounding areas know very well. So kick back, relax, grab a cold one, grab some food, and enjoy episode 31 of Whaddya Say with DDJ and my guest this week, Steve Tortorello.
This is P.L. Myers, a shot to the top, pro wrestling's manager extraordinaire. And there's only one thing you should be watching, one thing you should be listening to, and that's the man himself, Whaddya Say with DDJ.
All right, welcome to another episode of Whaddya Say with DDJ, and joining me this afternoon is the principal of Marian Catholic High School in suburban Chicago, Illinois. That would be Mr. Steve Tortorello. Steve, how are you doing this afternoon?
I am doing incredibly well, my friend. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming on and doing this with me. A lot of things I want to talk to you about, but I'm going to start off my show like I do with every interview and ask you, Steve. Steve, how did you discover professional wrestling?
Great question. So I think I first probably came across it as a Saturday morning program when I was a kid in the 80s. I was born in 85. So I was watching Saturday morning TV as a 3, 4, 5-year-old. And those are my first memories, watching Saturday morning clips and playing with my friends. And then from there it became the toys, all the action figures, the wrestling buddies. So that's really my first memories of wrestling, is it being like one of my Saturday morning cartoons.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was like the earliest memory of like something that you saw on a show? Like I tell people the earliest memory I have was Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth reuniting at WrestleMania 7. I started watching a couple months before that, but that's like the first real everlasting memory I've had of watching it. What would you say would yours be?
I probably when Earthquake broke Hulk Hogan. I think he broke his back.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably maybe 5 or 6, and I just remember watching that and being shaken the rest of that Saturday afternoon, whatever summer's day that was. That specific event is kind of seared in my memory.
Wow, that's a good one. I remember that was a little before I got into it, but it's something I've gone back and relived many times. And yeah, I remember being sad. So who were some of your early favorites when you first started watching?
Well, as a kid, I was a little Hulkster, right? I was a Hulkamaniac. So I had every Hulk Hogan action figure, the one that body slammed, the one that punched. I had the Hulk Hogan wrestling buddy. And then I really got out of it in the early to mid 90s. I did not follow it much from, say, 92, 93 to 98. And so I kind of grew out of it, wasn't paying attention. And then when I came back to it in 98, I was particularly drawn to Mick Foley. Mick Foley was my hero in 98, 99. I bought the Mankind book. I did my research project as an 8th grader on Mankind and wrestling, and he was my guy when I came back.
Awesome. And what was it? Was it that when you kind of grew out of it, was it just other things, or just was the product wasn't interesting to you? What kind of caused you to kind of get away from watching for those years?
I think it was a combination of both things. Number one, I kind of grew and changed. And then as I became a wrestling nerd, later on, and went back and relearned that era that I missed, I kind of thought to myself, I didn't miss much. It was a really bad era for American wrestling in those few years there, or at least for me, for my tastes. So I think it was a combination of me growing up and the product not really having its footing for a few years there.
Gotcha. Now, did you were you the only person in your household that watched wrestling? Did you have family like brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, or were you flying solo?
My dad had watched it on and off for years. So when I kind of got into it as a kid, my dad could talk with me about it. And same thing too, when I flash forward years later, when I became a fanatic about it, I kind of pulled my dad into it more. So now my dad watches everything on his own still to this day. And he'll text me on a Wednesday night about whatever's going on Dynamite. So I kind of had my dad. My mom and my sister were not really into it. And the other kids at school at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, everybody was watching Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. So it was one of the things we watched, one of the things we did.
That's cool. Yeah, that was kind of reminds me of like my time, because that was kind of how my grandfather and I bonded. That was our time together, was watching wrestling. And like I said, my dad used to take me to the shows, before I got my own car and could drive myself to the shows and stuff. So yeah, so it gave me a lot of good memories with my dad, and my grandpa as well too. So when did you? Because obviously, did you ever? Let me ask you this: did you ever have any aspirations of becoming a pro wrestler yourself?
Fleetingly. I've never been a great athlete, and I've always known that. I mean, the fix was in when I was 12. So from an athletic standpoint, that was never really in the cards, although I was always interested in it. So actually, when I lived in Los Angeles for a couple of years in 2008, 2009, 2010, I trained. There's about 6 months in there where I trained 2 or 3 nights a week, went to a little school in Anaheim. And it was one of those things where I think I always knew in the back of my head I was never going to be a performer, an athlete, but I wanted to do it because I wanted to have been able, I didn't want to be 50 and say, gosh, I wish I would have done it. So right. I trained, but I always saw myself more as, if I ever got into wrestling, a commentator, a manager, a booker. I was always fascinated by the minds in wrestling. I mentioned Mick Foley earlier and his penchant for storytelling. I was drawn instantly as well in the late 90s, early 2000s to Paul Heyman. So I always could see myself in that kind of role. I knew I was never going to be The Rock. I could be the sock portion of the Rock and Sock connection.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Mick Foley and like what kind of influence he's had on you. Do you have a particular match of his that you would say is your favorite?
The one that brought me back to wrestling, and this is a little bit stereotypical and cliche, but it's the truth, was Hell in a Cell in 98 and King of the Ring 98. I had 2 great friends that I grew up with that were brothers. They were huge wrestling fans. And at the time, I was not a fan, 96, 97, 98. And I would always tease them for watching wrestling. Like, come on, we grew up. Why are you still watching wrestling? And I would just friendly and kind of tease them. Right. And they would always get the pay-per-views and they'd tape them on VHS. Well, I was teasing them that summer in 98 when they said, all right, shut up. We're going to show you something. And they brought me down to the family room. They put that VHS tape in. They said, you're going to watch this match. And it was Foley versus The Undertaker, Hell in a Cell. And that instantly shut me up. And the brutality, the craziness of that match, the characters involved. So for me, that will always be a specific Mick Foley match that stands out because it's the match that started me on this journey into wrestling. And then the other one I would share as well is when he wins the title from The Rock in late 98, 99. That match, I think, is still the most electric final few minutes I've ever seen in wrestling. From Austin coming back out to Foley finally winning the title, it's just magic. That is an example of what wrestling can be.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you mentioned that match because that is like my favorite Mick Foley moment. I legit had tears in my eyes when he won because I remember seeing him parading around the ring with the title and just feeling the pure and genuine excitement he had. Do you feel like that moment was cheapened at all by what Tony Schiavone said on Nitro earlier that night when he basically spoiled the match and said that'll put butts in seats?
No, I think it showed how out of touch WCW was. Because as we all know, Tony Schiavone says that as directed by Bischoff, and then a ton of people switched the channel to see it. So I think WCW had this attitude of, well, they're not real stars. And the reality was the zeitgeist had shifted. And people did see Foley and Triple H and Rock and these guys as big stars. So that moment, I think, solidified. I don't think it tarnished that moment. I think it just shows you how much Mick Foley was on the cutting edge of what people wanted and how out of touch WCW was.
Yeah, good. Well said. Um, so my next question is obviously you decided, you said you went and trained for a couple weeks in Anaheim, for wrestling.
For about 6 months, yeah, for a while there.
What was a typical day of training like?
We usually do 3 hours of training on a Tuesday or Thursday night. It would be 7 to 10. 7 to 8 was all cardio. So we started with a lot of runs and then a lot of drills. And it was just, and it's interesting because at that time I was like 22, 23, and I was in very, very good shape cardiovascularly. So the cardio stuff was fine. And I was one of the top handful of guys in the class with the cardio. Then from 8 to 9, we would do a lot of the wrestling drills, and I would get blown up in a heartbeat. We would do leapfrogs, we do arm drags, we do rolls and bumps, all of those things. And I quickly found that explosive in-ring cardio is very different than being able to run or do mountain climbers. I could have done those things all night long, but 10 leapfrogs and I am winded. So it was really athletically draining, but it was exhilarating. And then the last hour we'd learn various moves or we'd learn combinations. And then the more advanced guys in the classes would put on a couple of matches at the end of the night and everybody else would watch. So it was a pretty intense evening several times a week.
Wow. Yeah. See, I never been one that's been in the physical condition I think you need to be in to become a pro wrestler. So that was never, something I never even considered myself. But so you mentioned that you really got into, becoming fascinated with Paul Heyman. What was it about him that really kind of like drew you in? Like, what is it about Paul that kind of makes him appealing to you?
I think it's a couple of things. It's the quick-wittedness, the creativity, and the ability to focus on a very clear story. And so one of my other loves is improv and sketch comedy. And I think the same things that make people great improv and sketch comedians make people great personalities in wrestling. And what Heyman is so good at is being able to pivot on a dime, creatively tell a story, but also make it very clear. There are so many promos in wrestling that ramble, whereas Paul Heyman knows exactly what he wants to sell and exactly the picture he wants to paint. And you could hear that. I actually first kind of became a fan of Heyman's when he was a color commentator in WWF. When he left ECW and come to WWF, I thought he was an unbelievable color commentator.
Absolutely.
And he made me think about the stories of the matches in a way that none of the other commentators did. And then later on, when he was running SmackDown, obviously he was the voice in the ear of Michael Cole and Taz. And I thought the commentary during SmackDown in that era was unbelievable. So Heyman has this storytelling ability that I think is second to none. I think only maybe Foley, Moxley, a few others in wrestling are on that same level.
Wow. Yeah. So you mentioned, you became a fan of Heyman's when he started doing commentary after he left ECW. And you had talked about just a little while ago how you got back into wrestling, around the summer of '98. During that time, did you ever get a chance to watch any ECW?
I did. In fact, I watched it here and there on syndication late nights in Chicago at midnight on Channel 26. And I actually got to go to November to Remember 2000. My dad took myself and a few of my buddies to that show at the Odeum west of Chicago.
Yep. I was there too.
Yeah, an unbelievable show. And I think they just had a particular ability to capture whatever the rising tide was with fans. Paul Heyman could smell it and pour gasoline on that. And their shows were always so incredible because of that.
Right. Yeah. I remember, and I've told a few people this story before. I remember the highlight of that show for me was being in the crowd and just being one of, the many that were singing, Sandman when the Sandman came out. And funny story, I was trying to kind of look around to see where he was, and he'd already been doing his entrance. I think we were about 2-3 minutes in. At Sandman's entrances were always about 5 minutes long and stuff. But I'm looking around, I'm sitting with my best friend, and I turn to my right, and he's standing right next to me. I'm actually sitting front row at this show, and he's standing right next to me. So I'm thinking, oh wow, this is cool and stuff. And what do? I slip out of my chair, and my So I kind of had a little bit of an embarrassing moment, but it was still so cool to be part of that entrance.
Now, all right. So, which side of the ring were you front row?
I was basically opposite, where the where they came out, the entryway. So like if they were coming out of the entrance, you know, the ramp and stuff, before they went around, like if they were looking straight ahead, I was facing directly where the wrestlers would come out and stuff. So
got it. So two people that we knew are parish priests. So I'm Catholic. I belong to a Catholic parish and run a Catholic high school now. The two of the Catholic priests at our parish were at the show, one of whom was a huge wrestling fan and had been his entire life. And me and my buddies would always talk to him about wrestling. The other one was very much like an athlete, a basketball player, kind of like a J. Crew kind of put together guy. And the one priest had brought the other to that ECW show because he's like, you've got to just come to a live wrestling show and see what it's like. And so sitting a couple rows from you, they were second row on the hard cam side. So they're probably 15 feet from you. And we met up with them after the show. And the one guy who had never been to a show before was just like, the athleticism and the atmosphere is unbelievable. And that's the thing that I have always preached about wrestling shows. You got to see wrestling live. So what a cool night that was. What a small world, too, that we were both there.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about that as you're telling me. It's like, oh yeah, I was at this. It's like, oh wow, I was there, and it's just, I've actually, one of my really good friends was actually at that show as well too. Actually, a couple of my friends were, and at the time, I not even met them, and we talk about wrestling, and I hear that, and I just think it's just talk about a small world. Now, obviously, you said you were belong to you know, you're Catholic and you run a Catholic high school. What are your feelings on like the way religion is presented in the world of professional wrestling? And a couple of examples I want to bring to your attention, kind of maybe if you can give me your opinion. The Reverend Devon character, and then the whole Vince McMahon versus God story that took place in, I think it was 2006.
Mm-hmm. Those are the two ones that I can think of. You know, I think both. I'm not personally offended by either, or I don't feel like either was necessarily the most distasteful thing WWE has done, because they've done a lot of distasteful things.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's anywhere near the bottom of the barrel. I thought both were just poor storytelling. I think it's very difficult to mix religion and mass entertainment and do it in a way that's respectful, but also tells a good story. I think it can be done.
Right.
But I just don't think either of those are instances of them doing that. I think the Devon character was borderline racist, I think, the way he was kind of portrayed. So I think it's one of those things where wrestling has this track record of, especially WWE has a track record of trying to tiptoe the line of tasteful and just stepping way over it.
Okay. And then anything, and then what were your thoughts on, actually one I just thought of too, as you know, you were talking, what are your feelings on Seth Rollins' current character right now?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, like that is a way that I almost see that as being very parallel to CM Punk's Straight Edge Society.
Right,
it's kind of like a cult leader messiah character. I don't see that as necessarily distasteful. I don't know that it's the best character for Seth, and or the best use of him, but I don't think the character is distasteful. I think it's unique. There is no other character that has that in WWE right now. So yeah, I don't think it's bad. It's not how I would book Seth Rollins, but I don't find it distasteful or poor decision.
Gotcha. Okay, so you obviously are very educated, very knowledgeable about the wrestling business and stuff. Do you follow the current product today?
WWE, I watch the big stuff. So I watch the Rumble, I'll watch Mania. I really follow the recap. So I know what's going on always. I'll seek out clips of things if I've heard something is really good. I do not watch any weekly WWE product. I think the style, I think the production, I think it's just a chore, at least for me, to watch. I do watch Dynamite every Wednesday, and I think they do a fantastic job. I watch a lot of clips of Impact. I normally don't watch it live. I've not watched much Ring of Honor in a while. I watch quite a bit New Japan. I think New Japan's shows feature some of the best athletes and some of the best action in the world. And I actually watch a lot of indie wrestling. So I will be on my bike and I'll be watching my indoor bike, and I'll be watching Riot Lucha from Mexico. I'll be watching AIW. Since starting Warrior several years ago, obviously indie wrestling has really kind of become my wheelhouse. So I probably watch as much indie wrestling as I watch mainstream wrestling.
Gotcha. Well, one thing I'm going to recommend that you say, and my good friend John Bullard, if he's listening to this, will be very grateful. He runs a promotion out of Michigan City, Indiana, called Chicagoland Championship Wrestling, and if you haven't had a chance, go on Amazon Prime or you can order on Fight TV. His first show, Saturday Night Grapple Masters, which was recorded back in October of last year. Definitely give it a look-see because it's a great presentation. He was supposed to have a show coming up here in about a month, but he ended up having to push it back due to COVID restrictions. But if you're looking for something, definitely give that a watch because you will not be disappointed.
I've heard of them. I've not seen it yet, but I will check it out.
Yes, John's a really good dude. He's become a very good friend of mine. I've had him on my show a couple of times. So yeah, he's definitely give it a look-see because he's got a lot of great talent there. So you mentioned Warrior Wrestling, and that's a perfect segue into where we're going to go with this conversation now. When did Warrior Wrestling first enter your mind? Like, when did you first think Warrior Wrestling?
Seriously, I started thinking about doing a promotion in the summer of 2017. I've always had creative outlets, one sense or another. I mentioned sketch and improv comedy earlier. I actually ran a sketch and improv company for about a decade that we closed up in 2014 when people moved away. We all got older. We got different jobs, etc. So I had a few years of not doing anything creatively. And in 2016, I really kind of jumped into going to a lot of independent shows locally in Chicago and seeing everything. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking to myself, I would like to start my own independent promotion. At first, I kind of nibbled at maybe joining some other places or working around to help at some other places, but there were really never any opportunities. So I just said I'm going to do it on my own. And the idea really came together from summer of 17 through the fall of 17. And then after Christmas of 17 into the start of 18 is when it became a reality.
Gotcha. And one of the things that I really like about your shows is that you get a lot of like your students involved in that. And how does that work? I mean, is it just one of those things where they come and volunteer or just tell me about the process of how the setup and everything and how you involve your students.
Sure. It is really just a volunteer basis. So we have, so many wonderful kids at the school, and it started as the kids in our audio video classes, our TV and video production classes wanted to help working on the cameras because they wanted the experience of doing live events. And so then we had a few other kids who are on our speech team or who are doing a few backstage interviews here or there, or shadowing our backstage interviewers. And then we have a few other kids who are just big wrestling fans. And so they were volunteers to help at the Fan Fest. And, in exchange for getting to hang out with Mick Foley, they help direct people and take tickets. So it's just one of those things that's a win for everybody.
Awesome. And so what is the process like? Okay, so you've got, Warrior Wrestling, you've got your crew together. What kind of evaluation process do you go through when it comes to the talent that you put on your shows?
Great question. So we have a ton of ongoing conversations in the months leading up to shows. Eric, one of my best friends and my right-hand man, he and I do a lot of the creative, and we both believe very strongly in the flow of a show. So it's not just what names you have on a show, but what are the combination of matches that you have on a show? What do you offer a buffet of all different types of wrestling? And do you have an idea of how that show is going to flow? What's going to open? What's going to close? What comes in between? So we really look at having different types of matches. We want technical matches. We want lucha matches. We want big man matches. We want women's wrestling. We want tag team wrestling. And so we try to put together a show that is a complete plate. Almost if you think of what used to be the food pyramid became the plate for nutrition. You should have a little bit of vegetables, a little bit of fruit, a little bit of meat. That's what we think a wrestling show should be. It should be a little bit of all of these different things. And so that's what we look at. We look at, all right, we're going to do the vegetable scoop. What are the best vegetables we can have? All right, we're going to have the technical match. Who are the best technical wrestlers we can bring in to really put on a technical display? We want a big man, super heavyweight match. Who are the best guys we can bring in for that? And so that's how we go about it. We figure out what we want the show to look like, and then we find the best pieces for every part of the show.
Okay. Now, For those of my audience who aren't familiar with Warrior Wrestling, who are some of like the names that you've brought in, like that people may already know about? And then tell me about some of the names that you've brought in that maybe people didn't know about, that, you know, maybe kind of gone on to become known in the wrestling industry.
Sure. So some of the biggest, if you're a WWE fan, the big names you would know is our first show was headlined by Alberto Del Rio versus Jack Swagger or Jake Hager. Ricardo Rodriguez was there. I did the introduction for Del Rio. So that was the big draws. We've had Rey Mysterio. We actually are Rey Mysterio's final match before he went back to WWE.
Oh, wow.
He did All In. He did Us the day later, and he announced his WWE contract 5 days later. So we're the last place Rey Mysterio wrestled before he went back to WWE. We've had Phoenix and Pentagon, Austin Aries, Brian Cage, Tessa Blanchard, Kylie Ray, Molly Holly, Super Crazy, Ultimo Dragon. Mick Foley has beat up Frank the Clown. Kurt Angle has been a guest. Will Ospreay, Minoru Suzuki, Bully Ray or Bubba Ray Dudley, Jeff Cobb, Lance Archer. We've really been blessed over the years to have a lot of really big name stars. And those are the ones that might draw people in. But when you come in to see them, hopefully you see, as you mentioned, some of those up and comers. So we had Sammy Guevara before anybody knew Sammy Guevara on a national level. We had Darby Allin on our second show. We had Phantasma, who is now Santos Escobar in WWE, and one of his sidekicks, DJ Z, who is now Joaquin Wilde. I mentioned Brian Cage. I mentioned Lance Archer, Alex Zane, who signed with WWE, The Rascals, Blake Christian, Ben Carter, who's NXT UK. So we're always trying to figure out not only who is the name you know, but who is the name that you want to say in 2 years. I saw them in a high school gym or on a high school football field, and they were amazing. So we're trying to always find that next rocket ship that's going up.
Awesome. So I think about a lot of the guys that you had there and just thinking about what they've gone on to become. I believe you also have a Top Flight on there as well?
We sure did. We love those guys.
Yeah. And then one of my personal favorites, Brian Pillman Jr. And stuff. And he was a joy to be around in that. So, so you obviously, have the talent, you got the roster. Take me to the day of the show. What is a typical show day like for you?
It is absolute madness. On a show day, there has been a significant amount of work that's gone into prepping that day. All of the flight itineraries, all of the pickup schedules, all of the merch preparations, all of the ticket preparations, working with the custodial crew, working with the maintenance team, working with the ring crew, working with lighting, working with sound, working with front of house folks, and then working with the wrestlers when they get there. So it's a day of hurry up and wait. In the morning, you start doing all the setup, and then you start making sure all the flights are coming in and everybody's getting picked up, and then it's getting everybody to the venue and meeting with all the talent, and then it's making sure everything's in place as the fans start lining up, and then it's making sure that everything's flowing as the fans come in and we do our fan fest, and then transitioning from that to the show itself. So that from 9 a.m. till bell time is absolutely crazy. And then usually it's somewhat crazy during a show as well, as you're trying to make sure the wrestlers are ready for the next match, make sure all the cues are right. Is the time right? Is the sound right? Making sure nobody's injured. The biggest relief, and there's a phrase that we've come to use at Warrior that means everyone can exhale. And it's the phrase, the main event is in the ring. When we say on the radio, the main event is in the ring, everybody's been announced. Every sound cue has been hit. Now it's just on those last performers to go out there and crush it and come home safely. And then we can all enjoy. So there's this incredible afterglow after a wrestling show in the back when you've had a show well done, you're talking to the talent. And that is where the promoters and the crew can really let their hair down and enjoy it. So sometimes people ask like, oh, you've got to love the shows. I don't see half the show because I'm doing things. I love the time after the show when I get to talk with the talent, and then the day later when I watch the show back and get to enjoy it as a fan. But it is a hectic 24 hours.
Sounds like it. So you mentioned the Fan Fest. How did the idea of the Fan Fest come about?
It came about because we really wanted to create a festival atmosphere for Warrior Wrestling. And I'd been to so many, countless indie wrestling shows where sometimes some talent come out and they sell at intermission. Some talent come out and sell stuff beforehand. Some talent are hanging around to meet. Some talent aren't, etc. And you never know. It's kind of a crapshoot. And I always thought, as an indie wrestling fan, how cool would it be if I knew I was going to walk into an area and everyone was going to be there? There was no crapshoot to it, etc. Like, that would be, I'd pay money. I'd pay money to go just know everybody was going to be there and be able to hang out for a while with them. And so that's where the idea came from. And we started it with the first Warrior Wrestling, and people loved it. Yep. And so it just kind of grew from there. And, I have so many people who say, we love your shows, don't get us wrong, but the reason I drive 2 hours is for the Fan Fest. So it's like, great, well, then we're just going to keep doing it.
That's awesome. So have there, usually are there, what is I'm trying to think, maybe not necessarily singling anybody out and stuff, but I mean, have you ever had any issues with any of the talent that you brought in, and that? So, and if so, maybe not necessarily call them out specifically, but just what were some of the challenges that some of the talent that you brought in presented?
We've learned throughout the process of doing this that independent wrestling is a very loosely / not organized endeavor most of the time. So most talent are used to that. We come from, we're all teachers, right? We're educators. We run meetings. We have structure. We have agendas. We have things like that. And so a lot of times there have been a handful of talent who are used to being like, when am I on? Later in the night? Like, great, I'll show up late, or I'll show up, or they'll duck out during the show or something like that, and people will be looking for them. So those have been some of the headaches that we've had. What's been nice, though, over the course of all the shows we've done is we've really cultivated a core group of talent who we love having, and they love working with us, and we have developed this together so they get how it works. So if as new people get worked in, they're like, oh, how does this work? And the talent who've been with us 10 shows go, oh, so this is the way the Fan Fest works. This goes over here. Here's how we do this. And they just get kind of worked into the culture of it. So now we've hit the point where we have a very clear culture for how we do things, and new talent just kind of get like raisins being kneaded into the bread dough. They just kind of get worked in to how we do things. But early on, it was a challenge to wrangle the talent throughout the course of a day. That would be the biggest pain in the butt.
So you've mentioned, again, I'm going to bring it back to Mick Foley. You talked about how he was the reason why you got back into wrestling. What was it like for you when you first initially got into contact with Mick Foley? Then what was it like when you guys came to a deal and you knew he was coming here? And then what was it like kind of meeting him or seeing him, when he came to the show that the one time he was there for you specifically?
So I had met him before, actually. So in college, I ran a literary festival at our university, and I booked Mick as a speaker because a bunch of his books had been recent New York Times bestsellers. So I got to meet him a little bit in college and work with him, and he was just a gracious human, just a wonderful human being. In fact, fun story. So I was picking Mick up from the airport in South Bend, and you know how you wait with a sign for somebody, right. Foley or whatever. I thought it would be funny, so I was standing there as people were coming off the flight, and I had to find a sign that just said Al Snow. And he saw that, and Foley saw that and loved that. So we hit it off really quickly. So he was a great guy, and he was even better to work with in the wrestling context because he came in for this big angle for us in which Frank the Clown had put out an open hardcore challenge, and Mick Foley answered the challenge and destroyed Frank. And the entire segment was all Mick's idea. Every part of it, Mick has this brilliant creative juice that flows, and he saw it. And he gathered everybody who was going to be part of it backstage. The students who were extras, the wrestling trainees, Frank and everybody else. And it was amazing. It was like watching a general describe to you what it's going to be like when you go over the hill and win the war. Mick was like, this is going to happen, and we're going to do this, and then this will happen, and that will happen. And everyone is watching him with rapt attention. And you could see he had this unbridled passion for this stuff. He loves doing this. And so to see that, and then to see the finished product in the ring, as I said before, I rarely get to watch large chunks of the show because I'm so busy. I came through the curtain and watched that entire segment. And I remember Eric came through the curtain. He's like, hey, we got to do whatever the next thing was. And he looked at me. He's like, are you okay? I said, yeah, that was just the most perfect pro wrestling segment. And it was really a magical night, honestly.
That sounds like it. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of meeting Mick a few times as well, and he's always been very gracious to me and that and stuff. So it's really cool to hear other people, have the same experiences with Mick that I had. So we get to we're coming up on almost a year basically that this pandemic has been kind of wreaking havoc on our lives. And it seems like, we're kind of getting to the point where we're turning the corner, the finish line's in play, in sight. When the pandemic hit, what went through your mind as it pertained to your, Warrior Wrestling's future?
Great question. So at first we thought, we were planning to run a show in May. Maybe we'll have to push it to June.
Right.
No one knew what this was going to entail. And then when it became very clear that this was going to be a long time off, we said, all right, well, what can we do in this interim? So we used that time. We surveyed all of our fans about all the shows they've been to before, what they've liked, what they would like to see in the future. We put together a greatest hits collection that we released on DVD through High Spots. We began releasing little bits of content here and there via YouTube, as a lot of people were doing. We wanted to stay relevant and stay engaged with people. And then June of last year, the governor of Illinois put out guidance for outdoor seated spectator events. And for us, that triggered, well, wait a second. We had talked a year before in 2019. Eric had pitched the idea of doing a show in the football stadium and call it Friday Night Lights and make it like an outdoor festival. And when the governor's guidance came out, we looked at it and went, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we talked about. So by June of last year, our wheels were starting to turn. And we announced Friday Night Lights the weekend of 4th of July last year, and then we had it in August, and then we were off to the races. We had found a new way to do wrestling. But during that initial 5-month layoff, we just wanted to stay engaged with our fans and stay relevant somehow.
Yeah, and I remember getting those surveys and making sure I took them and stuff, because I haven't been able to make every show, but I've gone to my fair share of Warrior Wrestling shows and always had a blast. And I really enjoyed that because I was at the Friday Night Lights one, the first one that you did in August, and it was just so much fun. It was, nice to sit with a group of friends, outside. Everything was socially distanced. I absolutely loved it. And that led to what my next question here. You had one stadium series already last year, and you just announced the next one for this summer. So, tell my audience here a little bit more about the stadium series.
Sure. It was born of those ideas we just talked about, of doing it safely outside and in a way that everyone can feel like it's going to be a real wrestling show, but it's going to be safe. And so when we did it last year, so we did Friday Night Lights. It was a proof of concept, worked. And then we went, all right, well, we want to do this again, but we're running out of daylight as far as the seasons go. Because being in Chicago, it's going to get cold come October. And so we did 3 of them in September because we knew then that we were probably going to be off for a long time because we did not foresee a way to do a large indoor show. And so far we've been right. We're still limited to 50 people in a space anywhere indoors. And so in the course of doing those 4 shows last August and September, so many people, fans, wrestlers, crew members came up to us and said, I actually like this better.
I will agree with that. I did too.
And so we thought, all right, well, obviously we can't do it in the winter post-COVID, but maybe for the summer, late spring, early fall, any shows we're going to do, we do outside. It's unique. It's open air. It feels different. And so I think it will become a permanent part of what we do now.
That's awesome. So, you already had one big announcement with the talent that you brought on with Thunder Rosa just recently being announced. And I know she's a big favorite amongst me and my friends, so I'm really excited for that. Is there any clues, hints, breaking news, anybody that you could possibly let out on this episode here about anybody else that's going to be showing up?
Sure. Well, I'll name a couple of the obvious ones. Our current and the 2 former Warrior Wrestling champions will all be in attendance. So Trey Miguel, who has been unbelievable on Impact in the next few months and is just unbelievable in general, will be defending the Warrior Wrestling title at the first show on June 5th. Brian Cage, who's taking on Sting. I'm not sure when you might be hearing this, folks, but for us tomorrow, he's taking on Sting. We're excited to have Brian back, who's been a staple. Same with Brian Pillman Jr. Pillman will be back as well. So all three thus far Warrior Wrestling champions will be in attendance. We are in talks with a team you mentioned earlier about Top Flight, about possibly coming back as well. So, and there's a whole lot of other things in the works. So it's going to be a pretty exciting show.
Sounds like it. Now, how can people get tickets for this?
WarriorWrestling.net is our website. Everything is there. Tickets, you want to do DVDs, stream old shows, buy merch. It all comes off of WarriorWrestling.net. And you can follow us on Twitter at Warrior Wrestling, no vowels in wrestling, so WRSTLNG. Same on Instagram. But all the tickets go through our website. And not only are there tickets for the shows, you can buy the field seating or the bleacher seating, but also those Fan Fest tickets, as we talked about earlier. That, for a lot of people, is the real highlight of the Warrior experience. And just like we did in September, we have a season pass. So if you think you want to go to all three shows, all three Fan Fests, based on the talent that we're going to be announcing, you can save about 25 or 30% and just buy a season pass, a season ticket. It gets you all three shows, all three field seats, all three Fan Fests.
That's awesome, guys. It's a great deal. A lot of great action and stuff. And a couple more questions before I let you go here. One is, what is it like for you personally when someone, like just a random fan, comes up to you after the show and offers, his or her feedback?
It's always really helpful. Everybody has different opinions and everybody likes different things, and you're never going to please everybody, but we always want to know where we are with our fans. And I think this comes from the teacher background that our whole team has. In teaching, there's a thing we have called formative assessment, which is maybe I teach you how to do the Pythagorean theorem. And I go, any questions? You say no. And then I give you a test a week from now and a bunch of people fail. It's much better if I teach you the Pythagorean theorem and then I have you work on a few problems and I check and I see and I have you do a few practice problems. Then I know where you are as a student. It's the same thing as a promoter or entertainer to your fans. We need to ask. We can't just say, oh, people are going to love so-and-so. Let's ask our fans in conversation, in surveys. Let's actually get hard data about what people like. So to me, feedback is the lifeblood of putting on better shows going forward.
Awesome. And one last question here before I call it a day. What would you say I'm taking that back. I got two more questions for you.
Okay.
My second to last question is what would you say the best piece of advice was given to you by a talent that you've had on one of your shows? What was that piece of advice and how has that helped you with subsequent shows?
Wow. Brian Cage, the very first Warrior Wrestling show. Eric picked him up from the airport earlier in the day. He had a very early flight and had a great conversation with him throughout the day. He got to the venue very early, and he and I had a lot of conversations ahead of our first show. And he gave us a lot of feedback on show flow, on matches, on numbers of matches, on the way he's seen things progress in all the various indies that he's worked. And he has been just invaluable to us. I mean, Brian Cage, without getting too far inside baseball, from the intricacies of putting together wrestling matches to which talents will mesh best together to how a show will flow, Brian Cage is brilliant. And I think people see him on Dynamite or they've seen him on Impact and they go, oh, he's jacked and he can fly. True, but those are two of his 100 qualities.
Absolutely.
So Brian Cage's advice and back and forth thoughts on laying things out has been invaluable to us.
Awesome. And then my last question is, if you could book anybody out there for one of your shows, who would it be and why?
Well, we've been very lucky in that we've been able to check a lot of those off the list. Ray would have been the first person on that list ever. We got him. Ospreay, we got him. Suzuki, we got him. So out there now that we've not already worked with, and I'll limit it to available people. So I'm not going to say Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns can't take any dates.
That's good.
I would say Shingo Takagi is one of them, who is just an unbelievable wrestler.
Oh, he's
Truly
awesome.
unbelievable wrestler. I think Shingo versus Cage, Shingo versus Trey, Shingo versus Adonis could be truly magical. So Shingo Takagi is up there. And the other one I'd shoot for the moon would be Kenny Omega. You know, we were trying in 2018 to do Machine versus Machine, Omega versus Cage.
Mhm.
And now that they're both in the same company, I don't know that it will be possible. And I don't know that an EVP of AEW would take an indie date. But Omega is a guy that I've, you know, real quick story. I first saw Kenny Omega wrestle, first heard of him in PWG in 2009.
Okay.
As I said, I lived in Los Angeles for a couple of years, and I the first PWG show I went to, Kenny Omega wrestled. And I remember sending in a results thing to prowrestling.net, Jason Powell's website. And I did my results of the indie thing that they would post on the website. And I wrote in that write-up, whatever it is, Kenny Omega has it and then some. This guy just exudes that X factor. And that was in 2009 in Reseda, California. And I think he's only just built upon that in the ensuing 12 years. So I think Omega and Takagi would be the two that are on my bucket list right now.
Those are two great talents to have. Alrighty then. Well, Steve, I want to take you there for taking some time out of your day to actually, you know what? I keep thinking like this is it, but I got one more thing that I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
You mentioned, for again, those of you who may have not heard this, Steve's the principal of Marian Catholic High School. What have the challenges have been in terms of running a school during this pandemic, and how have you been able to kind of adapt with the times?
You know, obviously the challenges have been keeping people safe and being able to deliver quality instruction. You know, you can keep everyone ultimately safe by not having school, but then you're not delivering quality instruction and helping the kids learn and grow. And you can try to be as normal as possible, but if you do that, you might not be keeping everybody safe. So balancing that has been the challenge. We have, since last July, we've been on a hybrid model where every single class at Marian is live broadcast on Zoom. And as a family, you can choose if you want your student coming into the building or if you want to keep them at home full time. Either way, they're expected to participate live on Zoom. Teacher can call on them. Work is due electronically. And for those kids that come into the building, we basically split it up half and half, where half of them are here one day, half of them are here the next day. So, but everyone, whether you're in the building at the moment or at home, you're responsible for being live and logged into Zoom. And that has worked really well for us. Surely there's challenges, right? There's a lot of kids, especially those kids that are at home full time, who struggle with organization and follow through and just a good learning environment in the home. But it is provided us the ability to really serve the kids that we would not have had if we just kept them all at home or if we tried to ram them all back into the school building. We paired that with a lot of things like social distancing, one-way hallways, completely reconfiguring how our kids eat lunch, obviously masks in the building, every surface is washed every period. So balancing that safety, but also providing that quality education has been the toughest task. But, you know, knock on wood, we've been very fortunate and it's gone very well.
Awesome. Well, sounds like you got your kids in a really good place. It sounds like, it's a great school. Sounds like, it's nice to see that a lot of them are very excited and very involved with this Warrior Wrestling project. But Steve, I want to once again take the time to thank you for hopping on with me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you here in a couple of months at the show.
Dennis, thank you for having me, and I can't wait to be back in action.
Absolutely.
Hello there, wrestling fans. This is John Bullard, owner of Chicagoland Championship Wrestling, and you're listening to Whaddya Say with DDJ.
Thanks, Steve, for taking some time out of your day to chat with me. Really enjoyed hearing the background behind the creation of Warrior Wrestling. Also, really enjoyed your perspective on running a school during the pandemic, and look forward to what you have in store for us wrestling fans at the Warrior Wrestling Stadium Series coming up. Speaking of which, go to warriorwrestling.net and get your tickets for not only the show, but for the awesome Fan Fest. Be able to meet a ton of wrestlers there. Already announced so far are Thunder Rosa. And then, as discussed on the show, he will be having all three men who have won the Warrior Wrestling Championship, Brian Cage, Brian Pillman Jr., as well as the current Warrior Wrestling champion, Trey Miguel, who will be defending that title. The first show in the Stadium Series is Saturday, June 5th. The next show is Saturday, June 17th, and then there will be a date in August to be determined. Once again, go to warriorwrestling.net to pick up your tickets. And to get all the late breaking news on the Warrior Wrestling shows, you can follow Warrior Wrestling on Twitter and Instagram at Warrior Wrestling. That's spelled WARRIOR WRSTLNG. The information will be on your screen, as well as the information for the dates for the Stadium Series. Before I call it a night, I would like to just take some time to discuss what's coming up this week in the world of the Pro Wrestling Junkies Pod Squad. You just got done listening to my show. My show kicks off the week every Monday when this drops on all major audio podcasting platforms as well as YouTube. Tune in Tuesday mornings for the Junkyard, where myself, along with Spencer Cantor, aka Number 11, join the Dark Order, and Giovanni Tuhati will discuss the previous week in wrestling. Wednesday, we have Brad and Stevens talking wrestling, where this week they will be discussing the first episode of WWE Storytime, which you can get on the WWE Network, along with some great wrestling chatter. They'll reenact a famous promo, and I'm sure Steve will have a rant about something. And then definitely Thursday, don't forget my boys Shane, Steven, and Isaac go live every Thursday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time with Such Good Shoot, where they will talk about either a bad pay-per-view or an NXT takeover. They'll have something to discuss. Show's a lot of fun. Definitely give them a listen. If you can't catch them live on Facebook and YouTube, you can download the audio version of the show every Saturday morning. While you're at it, be sure to go to www.prowrestlingtees.com/prowrestlingjunkies to get yourself a t-shirt. You can get one of the great shirts that for the group Pro Wrestling Junkies, or you can also get a Such Good Shoot shirt, or you can always get your Whaddya Say with DDJ shirt. We definitely would appreciate the love and the support. And yeah, so that's all the time I have this week. Oh, and actually, no, I got one more thing. Be sure to catch me this week on the Micro Brawler broadcast with episode 30 guests Dave Canning, Nick Carpenter, and Ryan Crosley. They're gracious enough to have me on their show, and the show will drop on Tuesday. So once you're done listening to this and the other great shows that are part of the Pro Wrestling Junkies Pod Squad, go over, type in Micro Brawler broadcast in YouTube and check out my appearance on that show. Well, that's all the time I got this week. I want to take the time once again to thank Steve for coming on to my show. Really appreciated the time. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed it. And I'll see you in about another week of the brand new episode of Whaddya Say with DDJ. Thanks for listening, everyone.
If you love professional wrestling and great podcasts, check out Whaddya Say with DDJ on Facebook, Twitter, and also on ProWrestlingTees.com. In the search field, just type in DDJ and buy the best professional wrestling podcast shirt around.